Okay, so thank you all for coming for this event that's collaborative on the Design Research Week and also for the Center for Transformative Media. I'm Adriana de Souza Silva and I'm the director of the Center for Transformative Media. So I just wanted to say a few words about this center before we start. So CTM is Camden's interdisciplinary research hub dedicated to investigating the transformative potential of emerging media technologies in shaping grassroots creativity and promoting social change. We explore the many ways in which media technologies, I think that's a little too much. Do you need that?
I'm not doing
Oh, okay.
We can see it, we're good.
Okay. In which technologies interact with societies. That entails how emerging media technologies transform society, our creative potential to develop new media technologies, and also how creative uses of technologies improve people's lives. Especially now, we're really focusing on this idea of AI as media. That is, understanding AI as a cultural communicative force that shapes creativity, knowledge production, and cultural life. And also how it transforms urban spaces, storytelling, journalism, community engagement, and society. There are a few ways to be involved with our center, if you like. I mean, you can check out our website, and there's the QR code over there. Sign up for a newsletter or social media accounts. Apply for center membership if you're a faculty here or a PhD student. Can attend our bi-weekly brown bag lunches. And that's over, we have a space over in Snell Library where the tour of our gaming collection is going to be later after this workshop. Organize an event with us and also attend our event. So thanks for being here. This is some of our upcoming events on March and April. Next week we have a workshop with and a lecture with Jonah Brooker-Coyne, who is visiting us. It's going to be here at the Center for Design. And in April we have a book talk from one of our core members, Silke Meyer. And then we have the last edition of our AI webinar series, which is going to be on AI influencers and the future of creative economy. So you can sign up for all of them on our website. With that, I'm just going to move to our workshop. And I'm going to invite Dr. Reagan Glover to start.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for being here today. So we're going to present a bit about the Retro Mobile Gaming Project, which is a project that began back in 2017 when I was a wee grad student working with Adriana at North Carolina State University. This project is a resource that comprehensively catalogs the history of mobile games from 1975 to 2008. You could slide. And just to quickly introduce myself, I'm currently the chair of the Center for Transformative Media's advisory board, and I'm also the director of an undergraduate research program at the University of Michigan.
And yeah, as I said, I'm the director of the Center for Transformative Media, but I'm also a professor here in the Communication Studies department.
So for this workshop, we're going to begin by introducing a bit about the Retro Mobile Gaming Project and how we have approached building this repository and this resource over time from a single unrefined idea, emphasis on unrefined, to something that's much more comprehensive as almost like an infrastructure for studying the history of mobile games.
So this is just the outline of what we're going to do today. We're going to start by introducing the project, about 10 minutes, and giving you a brief tour of our website, newly redesigned, talking about the guiding rationale for the project. Then we're going to discuss the development process from problem to comprehensive resource. Then we're going to have an activity that you're all going to be doing based on what we talked about. And there's going to be time for sharing out your ideas and working with people that are on your tables. And finally, we're going to walk from here to Snell Library, where we're going to have a tour of the Retro Mobile Gaming Project, our physical collection, with Sutanuka Jasru, who is back there. She's a PhD student here at CAMD, working at the center with me. And we can have time for one-on-one Q&A if you have questions for us. And there's going to be pizza at the library, too. So I just wanted to start with talking a little bit about where the project came from. So our idea was that actually started back in 2017, I guess, when Reagan, as she mentioned, she came as a PhD student in our program, and she said, "Oh, I want to work with you." And I was like, "Oh, great! Well, what are we gonna do?" And I said, I have this idea that about creating like a research resource or database of games. I had since early 2000s this research on location-based games and urban games, which are basically, if you know Blast Theory's work, they're games that work in city spaces, and they are very ephemeral, which means that they take place during certain periods of time, and then they disappear. Unless you are a very good art group that makes good documentations like Blast Theory, normally people forget about the game. Around that time, also, there were a lot of startup companies that were launching games like Mojo in Japan, Boat Fighters in Sweden, but those companies, they just disappeared, and with them, their games and the websites. So that posed a problem for research, because how do you learn about these games and how do you search for them? Unless you had the URL or you knew the specific place and who created the game, you didn't know how to connect these games or where they came from. In addition to that, there was a lot of like defunct gaming software because they just stopped working in terms of game devices and consoles, decentralized documentation, the information on the websites was not up to date, and so we started thinking like, how cool would it be if we can have like an online resource and a platform that people who are interested in the history of games, and specifically mobile games, because that's where my research was at that time, could just basically connect games. So for example, if I want to know all games that were created in the UK from 2000 to 2005, how do I know that?
So, as Adriana has demonstrated here, there were a number of issues with trying to create a central repository of information that was widely scattered across the web, sometimes not on the web at all, sometimes just contained within the cultural memories of various populations who interacted with these kinds of gaming devices as children. So at the very beginning of this project, we faced an issue with knowing what to look for and how to sort of categorize it. But we also had another series of constraints that we had to operate within. So one is financial costs. Hosting information online and developing a database in the way that we have done, it cost money. It cost money to create a domain, to develop the kind of resource. So we needed to hire developers and designers that could do the sort of back-end work while we focused on pulling together this historical information. It's also a heavy time commitment. When you're trying to develop a comprehensive resource, you have to commit a lot of time. And as we mentioned, we were doing this. Adriana was the director of the PhD program that I was part of. She was managing her career as a researcher, and I was a budding graduate student in the PhD program. So we had to balance the pressures to publish, teach, to learn, and to serve with this. So we had to also reach out for help from others. We had legal requirements, so a lot of these games have copyrights. They're developed by Nintendo and other, like Bandai, other developers, and so trying to figure out how to navigate the legal landscape. So we had to reach out to people who specialized in copyright law to understand within which constraints we could operate and how we could share that information publicly. You may be thinking fair use, sure, but we wanted to prevent challenges to the fair use doctrine. We also needed technical skills. So we needed software engineering, user experience research, user experience design, archival research knowledge of mobile games. And while we had some of this knowledge between the two of us, we had to recognize at the outset what our limitations were and where it was necessary to seek out support. And then as the project developed over time, we also had to navigate shifting contexts. For example, Adriana moving here to Northeastern and relocating the home of the database and the project more broadly. And of course, me as an early career scholar moving up in my career away from the PhD program and into the world of being a professional academic. Mm-hmm. So all of these things shaped the process and the development over time. And I want to emphasize through that message that none of this came easy, and if we had thought about all of these constraints at the very start of the project, we may have never gotten started. And sometimes it's okay to just say, okay, there's a lot to learn, but let's just put something out there.
Yeah, so I just wanted to start by showing you a little bit of what, like, this is the newly redesigned database. So when we moved to Northeastern, with the help of Sutanuka, who was kind of helping me coordinate the RAs, we redesigned the website and we moved the whole database to another server. So basically the way it works now, you have this interface, and then, so for example, if I want to know what all the kind of, as I mentioned before, location-based games or hybrid reality games that happened between 1975 and 2008, I could add other filters there that work on 3D, but then there would be no games. So the more filters you add, the fewer games you're going to get. So for example, I get geocaching. And then you click on an entry, you have the game description, the developer, with the kinds of technologies it used, the purpose, it was for entertainment, and this was, in this case, was open source. If it's multiplayer, single player, where it was developed, the country, we're going to add city here. And we had to develop, as Reagan's going to talk soon, a taxonomy of games, and this is a location-based game. And then you have a link to the website if it's still up. And we are in the process also of creating, adding more information to this entry. As you're going to see, this is a work in progress. We never feel like it's finished. We're going to have popular press articles that were written about the game, scholarly articles, and other images, videos. So any kind of information that we can find that documents the game, we're going to add to these kinds of entries.
You could click education.
Yeah.
I have a question. What kind of, you said there's a button there, contribute. What kind of contribution model? Is this a Wikipedia type of model of governance? Because that's a hard thing to scale.
Yes, so we do crowdsource information, and we'll talk in just a moment about some of the difficulties that emerge with that. But I agree with you, it can be very difficult to scale. So well, before we get to your point, so just pause on that thought. I promise we'll get to it. So one thing that we thought from the outset of this project was that it would never just be a database, because what is a database if you don't tell people how to interact with it and use it? So over time, we tried to level up our game, as we'll use the gaming language, to try to expand the kinds of resources and materials that we offer. So one of those was educational resources. We developed this What is a Mobile Game series, where various scholars could contribute an idea of what is a mobile game as an educational resource. We also developed lecture materials that a teacher in game studies, digital studies, or media studies course might integrate to teach things like how to do media history, or how to do archival research and how to contribute to the game. So we were thinking about, like, not only is this about learning about the history of mobile games, but it could also be a teaching resource that teaches specific skills that would be valuable in a communication, media studies, or adjacent type of degree. Beyond that, we also developed a physical collection, and of course this is what Sutanuka will demonstrate a little bit later, but this is a collection of donated and purchased handheld games that can be interacted with here on Northeastern's campus, so that you get the material experience of interacting with the game and playing it, because there's some limitations to a database in terms of how you interact and what you can do with that.
Okay. And yeah, the physical collection, as we're going to explain later, it was growing over time. It started with like small donations, and we asked people, oh, do you have any old mobile games that you don't use anymore? And start collecting. I have that very small research budget. We bought some things on eBay. But then after I moved to Northeastern with my research funds, I could buy more games too and acquire. We're still receiving donations, but now we got to a collection that's up to like 200 games and consoles, and there's still more that we can, I mean, that requires a lot of research too, to kind of find out these games.
Yes. So as we were building this project from the database all the way up to the more comprehensive resource, we actually learned from mobile games themselves and the way that they're played as instructive to our procedures and our process for creating. And so as we took away 4 key lessons about how to build and design towards a comprehensive resource, which is being okay and open to exploring and experimenting. So when you're playing a mobile game, a lot of the times you don't really know what you're doing. You just have to jump in and figure it out as you go. You can seek support in the forms of like paramaterials or looking to other people who've played the game for information or insight, going on a Reddit forum and so forth. And also, with early mobile games, you continuously have to start over when you lose a level, and there's reasons for that, like memory constraints. But in our case, we had to be very okay with starting over again as we learned new lessons, as we skilled up in our project. And that's something that I want to emphasize here. Starting over is an inbuilt form of play, of creativity, and it's an opportunity not to be, well, I should say it's not something to be upset about. It's an opportunity, if you think of it that way, to learn and improve your skills and to do things better another time around. And that was integral to our database. This past year and a half, 2 years, we've scrapped the database design completely and started from the ground up to develop something that was much more user-friendly and that demonstrated our experience over the years of learning more about mobile games and more about what this project could be.
Yeah, and I think that what that tells us is that you shouldn't be afraid to restart. And then sometimes, the important thing is to have a concept, an idea in your head. And this idea can kind of unfold in many different ways. So this is like the second or third version of the database we have. So as I just mentioned, building up means starting even when you don't know how things will work. And so it came from like an idea we have, let's create a research resource, to the implementation, but we are not aware of all the challenges and the things that we're gonna learn during the process. So first, we want to talk about this idea of building information, experimenting with strategy and exploring even when you don't know where you're going. So the first thing we had to do is actually starting to building from a base knowledge and kind of knowing mobile games and their developers. We actually, as we mentioned, we started from, I had this previous research on the history of location-based and mobile games, in which I kind of had mapped most of these initiatives and resources and games around the world, but that was also limited, right? First of all, I had created a taxonomy of like hybrid reality, location-based, urban games, and that's where we started to kind of like trying to categorize the games and understanding what's the difference, overlap between them, how we're going to present them in the database. But on top of that, there were games that, like more traditional mobile console games like Nintendo Game & Watch and things like that, that we knew because I played when I was a child, but we had to do that search and try to, work with research assistants to find out more about these games.
Yeah, and as our attendee has so brilliantly anticipated and predicted, we had to crowdsource data. And the reason is that while we had a general hunch of what some games and what some developers were, we knew there was a whole treasure trove of games and details out there that we just couldn't anticipate. And I often think of this process of like trying to fill around in the dark for something and you don't know what you're looking for, and it's also you can't see what you're looking for. And this is exactly what this process has felt like for us. So we use crowdsourcing as a way of pulling from other people's memories and not just relying on our own searches to try to figure things out. But of course there was some difficulties of that. One is that when you are crowdsourcing data, the data is often error prone. People have typos, they don't think of games in the way that we would as researchers, and even with a user guide to help them develop entries, the data needed cleaning, and that's something that we're still in the process of doing. Is we've developed a pretty significant number of gaming entries, at least a good start in our eyes. But we have to continuously look through that data, and that takes manual labor in the form of RAs and then our supervision, which again, time constraints can be a challenge. So there is a scalability issue to that specifically over time. We are experimenting with an AI chatbot to try to help us a little bit, but as you might anticipate, there's also some challenges and errors in that. Audrina?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that, you know, because you mentioned Wikipedia, I mean, the difference here is that you don't, whatever, when you click contribute, the idea is that it doesn't go straight onto the website. We have like a filter, it goes through the administrators, and we have to approve the game, so to make sure that it's pertinent. So, but that takes labor, right? We are trying to, as Reagan said, like, work with a chatbot, but it's it is still something that we are about to implement. We just created the new system for contributing, and so we're going to allow people not only to suggest games, but also to edit the entry. So if you have a specific account and then you see an entry that, oh, I want to add to that, I have more information about this game, you can go there, and so that we are kind of pulling out on knowledge from other people as well, and not just ours.
Yeah, and we also did a number of searches on archives like the Wayback Machine, developers' websites, and so forth. So it's just, again, it's just a lot of like open-ended searches in hopes to find something. So exploring and experimenting.
Yeah, so how did we start? I mean, basically, as Reagan said, we had an issue that, I mean, we're both like communication scholars and media studies. We didn't have the developer background to build the database. So and also we didn't have funding or money to do that. So like, what we're gonna do? So we, at that point, we are exploring options, and we were talking with Dr. Lina Battistelli, who was a professor in the computer science department, and she managed this capstone project for the computer science undergraduate students, where they would normally receive funding from local industries to develop a project. But we didn't have funding to fund the project, but she was very keen on the idea that we had, the database, and one day she said, oh, there's one group that still needs funding, but if you want, you can work with them for free. And I was like, oh, that's great. So that was the first, we worked for 6 months with this group of undergraduate studies students who kind of started developing the first iteration of the database.
And so what ended up happening with this computer science capstone course is we developed what's called a minimum viable product. You all are designers, you probably know that term quite well. It was just something to get our idea off the ground. And it had issues, of course. And we just needed to be okay with those issues while we figured out things like the taxonomy of the games. So one of the issues as you're trying to add entries is you need to figure out a way to structure that information. And we're actively learning about games as we're doing that. So we had to make guesses, and then also in some cases more informed decisions about what details were most pertinent and which we could exclude from the database, because you can't say everything. It's a rhetorical choice to determine what information you'll categorize and what you'll exclude. And then the other thing is we had to scale up, and that meant bringing in highly skilled workers over time. And Audrina, you were the key person in that, so I'll let you elaborate.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, when we were at NC State, we had this issue that we had not just to create the database, but maintain the database. And that was a question that computer science team asked us, oh, how are we going to do that? I was like, oh, we don't have funding. So we were actually, I was trying to get like new arrays to kind of that could kind of overlap with the old ones and learn skills and then keep maintaining the database. But once I moved here to Northeastern, because there are more resources, that we were able to kind of hire graduate students at master level to actually develop the database, and that's why we kind of scraped off what we had, and they said, oh, we can actually recode that and create a much more smooth process. So we kind of basically redesigned everything last year, and what you're seeing today is kind of the relaunch of the project that they've been working on for the last year and a half. But it's still, again, not done.
So one of the things that we want to emphasize in talking through this is we recognize that maybe you're not interested in mobile games. So what we're trying or attempting to share is how you scale up over time and how you build out over time. And here's a couple of things that we did in order to do that exactly. So we were gradually building up our resources over the course of the 8 years now that we've been working on this project. you know, we didn't start out, if we started out with like, oh, we need to build a physical collection, we also need to build pedagogical materials, it would have been too much. So we shelved a number of ideas, and later we're going to ask you, when you are participating in a workshop, what ideas can you shelve for now? We also developed project teams over time. So as our resources and our labor became more specialized, we realized that we needed to silo some of the work so that teams could, you know, be responsible for specific issues. So we have a design team, we have a historical, like, archival team, as well as a developer team, and then also we are the lead researchers on this project. So being able to begin where everyone's working together very collaboratively and over time build out project teams was really helpful. We also had to rethink our aim and scope in light of our users. So as we had more people interact with the database and we received feedback on it, we were able to retool the database to not only just say, initially we were thinking, oh, this will just be good for the public, but we also had to think, okay, so maybe it will be good for students, maybe it will also be good for researchers to use. And so that allowed us to reshape the kinds of information that we were providing, the kind of materials that we wanted to catalog. And then, as already mentioned, we had to restart to accomplish all of that.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, an idea is never finished, right? That's a good thing, like if you're like completely satisfied, okay, I'm done with this, then, there's always more to learn, always more to develop. So we want to, engage the public more that have interest, as Reagan said, like different groups of people, and show how this can be helpful. Grow the resource to crowdsourcing. I think that's a part that most of the entries that are in the database right now were created by us and the research assistants we had during this process, but we really want to kind of open up and advertise the project so we can get entries from outside. Also acquiring devices to increase the physical collection. As I mentioned, we right now have about 200 devices, but there is always more, and I mean, really the idea is to have a really comprehensive collection of games that we can document this history. And we also welcome suggestions on how to improve, so we would love to hear from you later on if you have any ideas of what we can do with this project.
So now we want to go towards our activity. It's a workshop basically designed to help you all think through a project or an idea that you might have and how you could actually develop that out over time. So if you need a worksheet, you might want to raise your hand. We handed those out at the very start. You can also scan this QR code if you prefer to work on your device. But we're going to walk you through step by step an activity to help you think through. So the first step of this activity on the front page of the workshop is I want you to brainstorm a problem that impacts either a community that you're a part of, a population that you're aware of, or some, maybe even like a research area that you are involved in, particularly where you find that documentation, information, or some sort of resource sharing is a problem or an issue. So where can you see a possibility to make an intervention? So here you'll describe the problem that you see, and then you'll also identify the impacted group and explanation of the impact.
Yeah, and we're going to give you 3 minutes to write down some ideas. Do you have any questions about that?
Is this related to the retro game or channel?
No, it can be any idea. It doesn't even need to be related to games.
Yeah.
Something that interests you.
Okay.
Yeah.